Thank you, Catherine. Can you all hear me all right? Am I good? Okay. It's such a delight to be here this morning. You have just fed me immeasurably with your singing, with the leadership, the beautiful music. What a great reminder of why we live, why we get up each morning, and how we can serve and obey the Lord with great joy. And that just dovetails right into what I want to talk about. So that's awesome. And I'm very excited to be here. Today, my topic is on successful leadership. There's, scads of books out there, ideas, thoughts, and of course the Bible is chock full of great lessons on leadership. So today I want to limit it to my perspective, which is as a Christian attorney, and share with you. I've had a lot of fun kind of comparing what I do in my legal practice to what I want to share with you from a Christian perspective. And even one thing that was very enjoyable with this was that I originally prepared my main remarks for a secular crowd. And so it's really a wonderful exercise to kind of translate it, in and out of Christianese. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, and to realize that all of God's wisdom and instruction, all that he wants for each of you as a Christian applies as well, even to non-Christians, and getting that to translate, that's an interesting challenge, huh? So to start on that note, I'm going to share what another attorney shared with me on successful leadership from Noah. I don't know if this is in the movie. I haven't seen it yet, but at least one person's extrapolation from the story of Noah in the Bible. Top 10 tips. One is, don't miss the boat. 2, remember that we're all in the same boat. 3, plan ahead. It wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And if you know the story, he actually got laughed at for a while because it took a long time for the rain to come. 4, stay fit. When you're 60 years old or maybe even 40 years old, someone may ask you to do something really big. 5, don't listen to critics. Just get on with the job that needs to be done. 6, build your future on high ground. 7, for safety's sake, travel in pairs. 8, speed isn't always an advantage. The snails were on board with the cheetahs. 9, when you're stressed, float a while. And 10, don't sell yourself short. Remember, the ark was built by amateurs, and the Titanic was built by professionals. All right. So, okay. Well, I am not a sailor. I am an attorney to nonprofits, as Catherine mentioned. I work with many churches and other faith-based organizations. Really, almost all of my clients, I think in one way or another, they want to improve the world. And I assume that's a huge reason for you all coming to Trinity, is in some way you wanted to improve the world through your Christian faith. I love helping people to fulfill their passion. Sometimes I say that documentation is my middle name. That's what I'm all about, is the paperwork. Doesn't that sound really glamorous? Okay, well, no. But I do help people to navigate through crisis and to plan so that they have legal compliance and they do things well. And ultimately, when I talk to nonprofit leaders, I help them so that their leaders would govern well. And I think that's important on any level. Personally, I grew up in what I would call a Christian household, but we really didn't do much beyond go to church. I rebelled quite a bit in high school. I had a lot of guilt and other issues that carried me right through college. When I was in the Bible Belt, I thought of most Christians as big hypocrites. I didn't have much use for them. But then as I went through law school at Emory University in Atlanta, I had a growing spiritual hunger that was straight from the Lord. And through Christian Legal Society and other opportunities for growth, I had this awakening spiritual hunger, and God, of course, led me right to the cross, to a saving faith. About 20 years ago, I got married, and I moved to Chicago. My husband had a burning desire to do inner city revitalization, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that's a little bit of my journey. I know each one of you has your own journey as well, and that we're united by our faith in Jesus and our shared foundation in God. I'm going to ask you some questions. Lawyers are very good at asking questions, so I hope you won't get tired of this by the end. But I'll start off by asking maybe a show of hands. How many of you have ever been involved with a not-for-profit? Yes. Actually, just by being at school here, you are involved in a not-for-profit, because that's what Trinity is. Great. How many of you have ever volunteered for a not-for-profit? Awesome, okay. How many of you ever thought of working for a not-for-profit? Okay, so pay attention, good, good. Okay, and maybe some of your parents maybe have served on boards or volunteered as well. Great, okay. So you can go home, I guess like you just had your spring break. Next time you can tell your folks, I learned what you guys are supposed to be doing on that not-for-profit, okay? What I want to do is I want to look at the legal duties of being on a not-for-profit board as a lens for examining and measuring and reflecting on our faith and our personal lives so that we can all grow as Christians. And one thing I'm so delighted to realize as I was standing and singing was that when I talk about not-for-profit boards, I always talk about duties, your legal duties, and that sounds so boring and responsible. And what I realized as we were singing together is what a joy it really is, right? It's a joy to be responsible and to serve a nonprofit, to serve however God would have you to work. And these are of practical value in so many ways. Okay, so I want to talk from kind of an overview standpoint. I want to, throughout my talk, I'm going to be comparing a not-for-profit organization with your personal life. And those blend together, of course, as a Christian, because we integrate our faith with our work. But from an overview standpoint, I want to compare first positions of trust. So directors of a not-for-profit organization are entrusted with governing an organization for others' benefit. The proverbial buck stops with the board. If you're on board, and many of you are already in leadership here, if you're on the worship team, or if you're helping to lead a mission group or something, you've got a group, whether you're called the board or the committee, but that buck stops with the people who are responsible. So you've got a position of trust. The fancy word in legalese is called fiduciary, which is it just means that you're entrusted. From a personal aspect, I want you to consider with what are you entrusted, or with whom are you entrusted? Some people are entrusted with children, with parents, other people under their care if you're babysitting. You're entrusted with your own self-care. Maybe you have jobs and you're responsible. Your whole life you're increasing in areas of responsibility and leadership. So consider what positions of trust do you hold. It's a very important biblical concept as well. If you think about Moses, he was entrusted with so much, and Elijah, Paul, they were all entrusted with different jobs that God gave to them. So there's a position of trust. Then think about accountability. Directors of a not-for-profit, that's why they come to me, because they're accountable to the government. We have to fill out all sorts of paperwork. They're also accountable to their donors in a church. The church board is accountable to the members, participants in the program, whatever a nonprofit runs. So I ask you, to whom or what are you accountable in that position of trust? I'm sure you all feel the accountability to your parents, maybe to your professors, to classmates, to different positions that you've taken on of responsibility, and of course, above all, you're accountable before the Lord. And then third, I want you to think about the stakes that are involved in your responsibility. For a director of a not-for-profit, there's a huge responsibility in terms of the reputation of the organization, jobs that might be on the line if the organization doesn't get the money that they need, and program participants again. Directors can even be personally liable if they do things really, really badly. So it's a serious job. Personally, what's at stake for you? Again, before the Lord, your reputation with others. You all know, I assume that reputations are built over a long time and can be lost very easily. So huge stakes. The safety of others if you're responsible for other people, or even your own health if you don't take care of yourself. And we can learn that very acutely, some more than others. So in summary, it's important for all board members to understand their legal fiduciary duties, to stay out of trouble, and to govern their nonprofit well. And these considerations apply for us as well, positions of trust, accountability, and the stakes are involved. So that's kind of a preview, okay? So what are these duties? What is this joy that is involved with serving on a nonprofit or with this lens towards your personal life? There's three. I'm going to start with the duty of care, sometimes known as diligence. And so you can kind of log this away for when you're on a board, or if you know other people. There's a duty of care that just simply applies a reasonable and prudent person standard, not requiring the skills and knowledge possessed by experienced professional business administrators, and usually evaluated according to the business judgment rule. Does any of that make sense to you all? I could tell my clients if you were on the evening news or if you had to tell it to the judge, how would it look? That's pretty much it. Did you do what you were supposed to do? Generally, directors and officers have to be informed about what's going on. They have to exercise good faith in making decisions, be reasonable, reasonably believe that the actions are in the best interest of the organization. So there's lots of things that are involved, and I'm sure you've already experienced that, whatever leadership positions you've had or positions of responsibility, if it's not technically a board. Things like showing up. If you don't show up, how are you going to fulfill your responsibilities? What's the money involved? If any of you all have bank accounts already, how are you handling your finances or finances of another organization if you've ever been entrusted with a position of treasurer? You have to ask questions. What's going on? How come Joe's not showing up? Where is the money? How's this program going to run? Did anybody get insurance? Are you supposed to get insurance? You know, who's tending the food? There's all kinds of things that are involved with running a not-for-profit, any position of responsibility. Not expected to be experts. You can certainly delegate. Not-for-profits call me all the time and say, how do I do this? How do I make sure things are run well? How do I complete all that paperwork? So how does the duty of care or diligence apply to your personal life and before the Lord? I want to share two examples. One is from, the clock just went goofy, so I thought, oh, I can be here all day, but no, okay. Sorry. So I have a friend who actually graduated from the seminary here, and he got out of seminary, and he went off to his first job, and he was very excited. And then it was time for him to, maybe he was an internship or something, it was time for him to change jobs. So he got this new job, and he was so excited because the job came really quickly. They sold their house really quickly, and I think even his wife found a job as well really quickly. So he called his friend and said, wow, God has given me so much favor because all these things came so quickly to me, and I must be pretty cool. I must be good. I'm doing what God wants me to because all this stuff came so quickly. And, you know, sometimes that's true. It is not a beautiful thing when God puts things in your lap, and I don't mean to disparage that at all, except to say that his friend, who was older and wiser, shook his head and said, oh. And my friend said, what do you mean? How can you shake your head? This is so awesome. He said, sounds to me like God made this easy because your faith must be so small. He was a little chagrined. And he thought about that, and he thought, you know, that might just be true. God meets us wherever we're at. It's not to say that, you know, here's a spiritual midget and here's a spiritual giant or anything like that. It's just to say that God knows what we can handle and what he entrusts us with, and our response is not to be boastful, as my friend, you know, as he sheepishly realized, but to say, okay, Lord, then what else do you want me to do, and how can I be responsible and serve with joy? A biblical example of that is pretty familiar, the story of the parable of the talents from Matthew 25. Are you all familiar with that? I just want to highlight it a little bit. It's a very challenging parable, particularly as I've gone through business development. I wonder, God, why did you put that in the Bible? Do I really have to follow that? So in this parable, Jesus shares about a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them with his property. For differing amounts of property, the first fellow got 5 talents, the second fellow got 2, and the third fellow got 1. And if you know the parable, then you know the first man, he took his 5, he traded, and he got 4 more talents. That's pretty cool. The second fellow went, sounds like he did similarly. 2, he got 2 more. And then the last fellow took his 1, and what did he do? He buried the money. He said, I'm not going to mess with this, and he had some harsh words about that. So the master comes back holding the first and second accountable and said, well done, good and faithful servant, to each one. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Master was so pleased. But then he had very harsh words for the third fellow to say, you didn't do what I wanted you to do. I don't want to focus on the result of that and to put God in a box that way. What I want to do is ask you some questions thinking about this duty of care and with what are you entrusted. So my questions are you showing up for work, for your commitments? When I was in college, I had a roommate who couldn't get up for her first morning in class. didn't go well. I think she dropped out. That's just like, what, you ever heard that? There's a book, I think 90% of helping is showing up. Are you showing up? Are you working hard? It's important to work hard. Sometimes people work too hard. Where are you before the Lord with that? Are you paying attention? And are you doing your job well? Because people are watching. My father used to say to me, and I hated it when he told me, but he would say, life is a test. Everything you do, people are paying attention. As a Christian, as your work ethic, whatever you're doing, are you paying attention? I do have 2 teenagers, so I'll try not to be too motherly with that, but that's important. My clients are paying attention to what I'm doing, and folks around you are as well. Where or when do you need to be asking questions? Is this a good idea to do this? Should I hang out with these people? Should I go out on a limb? Should I try something I've never tried before? Is this something that God wouldn't want me to do? Pay attention and be diligent. What kind of relationships am I building? What kind of trust am I building or hurting? What kind of skills am I developing? And I don't want you to go out of here thinking, I got to do everything all at once. Do everything as God would lead you. Are you teachable? And do you have a positive attitude? Are you helping other people? And what are you in charge of? And last question in this, who are you asking for help? That we can ask the Lord for anything. In James it says, if anybody lacks wisdom, ask. 2 Timothy, says from 2 Timothy 2:15, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. And onward in 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 and 17, talks about all Scripture being useful so that you may be equipped, thoroughly equipped, for every good work. All right, so that's diligence. Are y'all tired yet? I hope not. Okay, good. If any of y'all figured out, I tend to be more of a Martha than a Mary, so I'll temper my thoughts with that. Okay. Which goes right in my personal point. For me, God's given me all sorts of talents over the years. I just want to be an encourager. For many years, I think there was a lot of building. I think of my career as kind of a pie where I've done a lot of different things. I worked for a judge. I worked for a private law firm. I worked in legal aid in our neighborhood where my husband brought us to on the west side of Chicago. I was home with my kids for a long time. And I'll tell you, the best leadership development training I ever got was being a stay-at-home mom. So I'm very, very thankful for that. Also really enjoyed being with my kids. That was part of my duty of care and still is. And then for the last 8 years or so, I've worked exclusively with nonprofits in my legal career. Throughout it all, God's always been in control, even when I haven't seen it. And I see how so much of this, particularly now that my husband and I are in our 40s, and that may seem like, forever for you guys, like that's double your life, but we're continually reminded, God, what are you doing with us? How come I have all this responsibility? How come all these people come to me? Lord, I never set out to be an entrepreneur, and here you have me in this place. My husband owns some real estate in our neighborhood. He said, God, how did you work this out? How did we ever get the money to do this? We're not perfect, and we don't do things perfectly, but God's entrusted us, and maybe everything will fall apart. About a year or so ago, a lot of things fell apart, and it was very scary. God's brought us through that. So whether it externally looks like great success, like the 5 guy with the 5 talents, or it looks like a complete disaster, God's always been in control, and he's always honored that as we work hard, as we seek to obey him, he in turn blesses us. All right. So that's the first duty, duty of loyalty. Duty of care. Second duty is duty of loyalty. And as you can imagine, that means that you stay loyal. So on a board, the board of directors has to stay loyal to the cause. If you are ever on the board of Trinity International College, then you would put the best interest of Trinity forward. If your best friend had a kid who wanted to come to school here, and you were on the admissions committee, and you knew that he wouldn't be a good fit, the best interest of the organization, you would have to say no, because you always put the loyalty first to whatever hat you're wearing for that not-for-profit organization. Consequences can be very dire. You can, at least for a not-for-profit board, you can have to pay back money. You can lose face. You can damage the reputation of the organization. So it's very serious. So how does that fiduciary duty of loyalty apply to you all personally? Well, I'll ask you, again, I told you I was going to ask questions. To whom are you loyal? And what are your priorities? What are your best interests Not as maybe you would view it, or maybe even your friends would view it, but from God's perspective. What would God say your best interests are? To always be happy, or to always be comfortable? You don't always have to be uncomfortable, but we do need to think about the best interests of what we're doing and how we're serving. The biblical command is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and that's the essence of loyalty to God. For me personally, as I mentioned, I did not go to college as a Christian. I was very driven by ideas of success and the need to prove myself to the world, so I had to get good grades. I had to have really high accomplishments, and I really wanted to curry other people's favor because that was the most important thing to me, and that's what I was loyal to. So in Christianese, that's what you call false idols, right? We all have false idols. After a lot of years and a lot of mistakes, and I'm still working on this. It's a humbling experience to read what I'm going to share with you because I realize where I fall short too. But here's my rubric for my test of loyalty in the best interests of Sally. First of all, God. I am a Christian. It's the most important relationship I have in my life, and I need to follow him. And I will share as a point of praise is when I shared this message with this secular group last fall, I thought, I prayed and prayed, do I share this or do I not? Am I going to offend people? That's not why they asked me to come. And as soon as I said, I have to say that I serve God first, I got applause. I was so excited, and it turned the whole shape of my talk. So don't be afraid to tell people that's your highest place of loyalty. Second, self-health. You can't do anything if you're a wreck. If you want to stay up all night long on caffeine or do crazy things, you're not going to execute well. Third is my spouse. I'm very thankful for my spouse. I asked God and begged God if I had a spouse, if I could get a spouse, and I think finally he relented. But my point with that is you need cheerleaders in your life, whether it's spouses or best friends or your parents. Who are the people who are very close to you? And whatever home, maybe it's your roommate at this point, where can you make the place where you dwell a refuge for yourself and for others? And other family members. For me, it's my children. What other family members, what other connections do you have that you are very, very responsible for and you want to stay loyal to? I keep trying to tell my kids, you want to be, the world is hard enough as it is. Why would you want to beat each other up within our home? And it sort of takes, and then whatever work or profession, student life you have, that's on my rubric, that's number 6. Sometimes I feel like it's number 1, but really it's way down there. Does it mean you don't do your homework? Of course not. Or that you don't show up for your work responsibilities? No, but to always be in alignment of where your priorities are is very helpful to know what to do and when to do it and how to do it. Another way to look at the duty of loyalty here, or with joy, not as an onerous thing, but where is your heart and what does it desire? A key verse for me as I was transforming into my Christian identity is from Psalm 37, verse 4. Delight in the Lord, and he will fulfill the desires of your heart. Doesn't mean that if I'm a Christian, I get everything I want, right? That's very immature. But it does mean that he changes our hearts so that we desire what he wants. There's many good desires. I wanted a husband. Does that mean I get a husband if I'm a Christian? No. Does that mean it's a good desire or a bad desire? I don't know. But when I finally turned and said, God, I want what you want, then he fulfilled the desires of my heart. And it was really for great relationships, opportunities to serve, and meaningful relationships in the Lord. I want to use 2 examples of this delighting, good desires, bad desires, and how that all works. One is human sexuality. The world, in case you haven't read the paper or seen the news, and you guys could probably tell me more about the real world on this, but the world seems to be very strong about sexual desires from a perspective of selfishness. Does it feel good? What can I get out of it? It's what makes me happy. It's not viewed as a gift from God. I have a few clients who do amazing things in the area of human sexuality, of viewing it as a wonderful, mysterious aspect of theology. And the world says it's about equality and discrimination. And don't you get your religious beliefs involved with what is my right. And you all are going to have a much harder time with this, I think, than my generation, because it's all over the place. I do some work with religious liberty. There's a lot of people out in the forefront. It's really, really important not to shy away from it, not to hide behind it, but to say, well, God, what do you desire for me if human sexuality is a gift? I like what a Christian author, Jason Evert, said. Are any of you familiar with him? He's a chaplain on college campuses. He's a Catholic. And his phrase, which I tell my children at least once a week, is keep the fire in the fireplace. Okay? That's a little euphemistic, but that's good enough for me. Keep the fire in the fireplace. There's lots of desires for illicit sexual activities. I work with a lot of pro-life organizations. People engage in amazing denial. Is it a human life? Is it not a human life? When does it change? Can I get a late-term abortion, but I want to have a life? There's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of temptations. And if you're not tempted by all this, then you're lying, I think. And when you go down that path of those kinds of desires, then you get into objectifying people, objectifying women through pornography, losing sensitivity to what God has shown you. And I don't know if you've ever seen this book or not, but when my husband and I got married, somebody gave us this book, and they were this picture of this couple on the front. They were the frumpiest, nerdiest people I'd ever seen. And I thought, wow, that's what sex is about? Because the world says it's all about the cool people. God has great mystery in that. To continue on this keep the fire in the fireplace, just want you to think of fire burns, and it burns badly. As I work with clients who are dealing with crisis pregnancy or pro-life issues, and you realize how much fire burns into people's souls, into their very being when they're affected by those kinds of issues. And second, smoke clouds your vision. The more you twist what God has in mind for you through marriage, the more your vision gets clouded and confused. Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be here to preach, but that was very preachy. So thank you for tolerating that. On kind of a more practical, maybe a mundane level, something I've been really been interesting to note, again, as I've watched my teenagers, is being helpful. I think probably every one of you has some desire to be helpful, or you wouldn't have come to this college. And that's awesome. And I really commend that to you. When I was a teenager, all I thought about was myself. I did not want to be helpful to anybody. I'll just say that very, very frankly. And later I realized how good it feels to help people. Attorneys are very helping, notwithstanding the media smears. And there's a lot of professions that are incredibly helping professions. Teachers and social service workers, I mean, you can think of a lot of them, and I hope that you all are considering helping professions. But why do people help? And this kind of goes into the workaholic mode. Are you helping to impress somebody else? Are you helping because you think you're going to get gold stars before God? Are you helping because you have guilt? Like I had a lot of guilt going through college. Are you helping because it's going to make you feel good because you're important? I know somebody recently who just got out of college. He had a lot of important jobs, and now he's like getting coffee and watering the plants. Is he important? Of course he's important. But check yourself when you say, I'm being helpful, because it's great to be helpful, but be helpful for the right reason, which is out of loyalty to the Lord. All right. And the third duty, the last duty, is the duty of obedience. And I love that when we were singing earlier, we talked about obeying God and how we want that more than anything. We'd cross the desert so we could go and follow God and obey him. And that's awesome. For nonprofits, it means knowing your organization and your mission and stick to it. Of all of you who raised your hands when you said you've worked with a nonprofit, how many of y'all know what that nonprofit's mission is? Great. Okay. Do you think, and then you can evaluate, are they sticking to the mission? All right, that's part of the board's responsibility. Sometimes the mission changes over time. It might be geographic, it might be programmatic. All right, so how are we going to apply that personally? Well, let's identify what's your mission. What is your mission? What's your mission in life right now? Can you say it in your head? Have you ever written it down? Paul in Romans 1, and I think he identifies it differently, a little differently every time, but the essence of it, in Romans he says, I'm a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God. Paul was on fire. He was contagious. He was unstoppable. He went all kinds of places. And he knew his mission cold. And he stuck to it, to the death. For me, when I was a stay-at-home mom, I was involved with a Bible study. And the number one mission of that organization, which I love, that's not why I went to the Bible study. I went to the Bible study to make friends. That was my mission, and to get out of my house. But the mission of the organization was to help people develop a vibrant relationship with God. And that has stuck with me because I think really that is the heart of life itself. It is not to be happy. It is not to have the most possessions. Although a lot of those can be byproducts, it's not necessarily to have a spouse or to be an overseas missionary or to be a corporate person here. The goal is to develop a vibrant relationship with God because out of that, our joy, all the beauty around us, even our suffering, all of that flows out so that we draw closer to God. And as we draw closer to God, everything follows. The Great Commission follows. Why would you go and do likewise? Why would you spread the gospel anywhere? Because of what God has done for you. And when you forget that, or if you forget that, then you really won't be of much use because it starts at the heart and then it goes outward from there. It may look different over time. I think your mission during your 4 years here at Trinity is going to look different than when you get out. And when you get out, you know, a lot of people are having kind of a struggle. Well, what am I doing? Is it about getting the best job or getting the best grades? Where do you want me, God? I am your child, and I'll be where you want me to be. It may look different. For me, a big surprise has been community. I'm very involved with my community in North Lawndale. We're there's relationships over many, many years. It's been such an incredible joy. And you know, God has such an amazing way of taking your life. I said everything builds and life is a test in that series, but God redeems. And if you know the story of Hosea and the beautiful story of redemption, that God redeems the years the locusts have eaten. When I was a kid, we moved around tons, and it was very difficult. And I prayed, could I please stay in one place? And God has redeemed that so that I have this rich community out of which many of my clients come so that I can serve him. And that's a big part of my mission. So how about you all? I just asked you, what is your mission? Has it changed since you came to college? How do you see it changing after college? What things should you change, particularly with the desires that you have? And I don't mean that to beat up on you. I don't want you to go home and say, oh, I have these bad desires and I need to change. Maybe you do, but what I really want most of all is for you all to be able to look at your heart and say, Lord, I confess these areas, and I ask you to help me with how I handle areas of care, with my loyalty to you first, and being obedient to that mission that you're calling me to. If you're not sure of what your mission is, then I ask you, what's driving you? What's motivating you to get up in the morning? And be really honest, because you know, God is so honest with you. You know, when Elijah ran to the cave after his huge victory, God came to him and twice said, what are you doing here? Not that God didn't know what he was doing there, but because God wants you to articulate that. What's your deepest passion, and how does that fit in with your talents? That's such a critical question for you at this season of your life, and I'm so excited to see your obvious enthusiasm for going out and serving. What are your benchmarks for your success, and who will you measure them by? Have you ever heard the expression, comparison is the thief of joy? So don't worry about comparing yourselves to other people. Compare yourself to God and ask him, I want to be like Jesus. Because you are on a mission with Jesus. Sometimes we think of ourselves as being on a mission from God or for God, but really you're on a mission with God, and that's what's going to sustain you and help you to get on to the next level. So keeping all these things in mind, I'd like to close with Moses' admonition to the Israelites from Deuteronomy 30. Moses goes on reminding the Israelites about all the ways that God's taken care of them, and that's very useful. But then he gets to the heart of the matter, and he says, see, I have set before you today life and death, good and evil. Follow God, and you will enjoy blessings. But if your heart turns away, well, then there's going to be curses and misery. And therefore, choose life that you may live loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him, for he is your life and the length of our days. So being on a mission with Jesus, being loyal to God first, being diligent in attentiveness in all that we do and who we are, I want to encourage you with those words so that you can think and ponder them personally, and then when you get on a board, you will be all set, and you won't need to learn anything else. Well, no, actually not. But you have a great foundation, and you can share that wisdom. I'm going to close this in prayer, and want us to just say thank you so much for listening attentively, for allowing me to be here. It's just incredible joy, and I'm so excited for you all as you consider where God has placed you and what he's doing in your life and will continue to do in and through you. So let's close in prayer.